King Arthur was released in 2004 and was directed by Antoine Fuqua. It stars Clive, Owen, Keira, Knightley, and Ioan Gruffudd, and follows the story of Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table as they go on one final mission beyond Hadrian's Wall to get the Pope's favorite godson and bring him back, just as a group of Saxons are coming down from the north to attack all of Britain. For those of you that don't know, King Arthur is the untold story of the legend himself, done in a more historical way by taking historical and archaeological findings to tell a more realistic portrayal of the man behind the legend, and that's more or less just a marketing gimmick to get you in the theater, because really, there's not much historical ground here, and it's difficult to know where these stories originally came from, like, even if there was a real person or not. But nonetheless, this is a historical epic that came out just around the time of all these other early 2000s epics, and I did debate talking about this on the channel because it is a shorter movie, and there's things about it that aren't like the other epics that came out during the time. However, I did look at the movie's budget, and it was right around the range of all those other epics that were coming out at the time. It is a historical film. It's got battle scenes. It's got a huge cast of characters, so I thought, why not include it? And overall, I enjoy this movie quite a bit. Now, I actually grew up watching this film quite a lot as a kid. I remember waiting for the bus to come for school, and I would watch this until then. And I always enjoyed watching this. I just loved the battle scenes. I really enjoyed the characters. I liked sword fights a lot back then. I was a big Lord of the Rings fan, so anything with big battles, sword fights, I just absolutely loved. But rewatching this after so many years, I was taken aback by just how good the acting was, and also how great the battle scenes, and especially the music. Now, King Arthur is not a perfect film. Some people are probably not even going to really care about this film that much, whether you watch the theatrical cut or the director's cut. But nonetheless, I still had a lot of fun with this movie, and a lot of that comes down to the acting. Clive Owen in this movie as King Arthur gives a really great performance. He is so commanding in this role, and I think he just does a really good job of being the leader of these small groups of knights, and he's really good, and I really like his relationship with his other knights, such as Ioan Gruffudd playing Lancelot, who is another favorite of mine in this movie. Him in particular, for me, is probably the best performance in the movie. He just brings so much passion to the role, and I love how hot-headed he can get sometimes, and just, there's a lot of depth with Lancelot that I really did enjoy. In fact, there's a small little bit of depth with all of these knights, particularly in that they're not the typical knights that you see in other King Arthur adaptations. These are Sarmatian knights. These are people that were taken from their homeland to be placed as knights, and they have to fight until their time is up, then they can return home. And Lancelot in particular has to really deal with that because he was taken from his home at such a young age. And so there's a lot of baggage with him. Also, I just really like who they got for the knights in this movie. They've got Ray Winstone, you've got Mads Mikkelsen, you have Joel Edgerton, and they all are unique and fun. Sometimes the characters are kind of bland. Sometimes there's not much to a couple of them, but they're able to stand out due to the way they play off of each other, how the actor plays them, and also just little banter here and there, and also in the way they look, and especially the way they fight. I do like how, especially in the first action scene of this movie, you see how each character works and how they take at different situations. You see they use different weapons, they have different armor and all that different stuff. It makes them rather unique, which I did really like. I also really like Keira Knightley in this movie as a very different Guinevere, who is part of the Britons, and she's really mysterious in this film and so subdued, especially in the beginning of the film where she's such this fragile human being, but then you see her grow throughout the movie to be this very vicious warrior, and near the very end of the movie she's leading armies into battle. That stuff is really cool, and the relationship between her and Arthur is it's all right, but I do really like the hints that we get of the Lancelot and Guinevere relationship. It's not much. In fact, it could have completely have been taken out of the film, but there's just these little eye movements that they give that really does mean a lot. I also really liked Stellan Skarsgard as our villain of the movie. He's part of the warring Saxons that are coming in and invading, and he's great, but the villains in this movie are definitely the weak link of this movie. They're pretty terrible, honestly. There's nothing to these characters at all. You don't really know anything about them, and as you go along, you're like, these guys don't really feel like a threat at all. I'm not emotionally invested in them. I'm not worried about our heroes, and so that is kind of a disappointment. But what isn't a disappointment is the action scenes. The action scene at the very beginning of this movie is really fun and really violent, especially when you watch the director's cut. And apparently, the studio wanted to tone down the violence, so they kept it from being even more violent, which, I mean, I wish we could have gotten that cut of the movie. That would have been really interesting and cool to see. But the action scenes, the battle at the very, very end of this movie is just fantastic and epic to behold. Antoine Fuqua has never really done a film on this level before or since, and it's just really cool how he does battle scenes and the way he films them to make them so energetic and fun. I love the final fight scene between Arthur and Stellan Skarsgard's character. That stuff is really fun. I love a good sword fight. But yes, that stuff is great. Also, Stephen Dillane is in this movie, and if you don't know who Stephen Dillane is, he's King Stannis in Game of Thrones, and he's completely unrecognizable in this movie as Merlin, who is so mysterious and different from any type of Merlin we've ever seen before. I mean, he's a little bit more realistic. He's not a wizard or anything, but they treat him with such mystery, and he barely has a word in this movie. But when he does speak, it really does mean something. I love the scene where Arthur, Guinevere, and Merlin are all together in the woods, and there's snow flying. It's beautifully shot, and just the conversations that they have are really interesting. In terms of other stuff that I don't particularly like, I already mentioned that the characterizations with many of the characters are kind of weak. Some characters don't get much development at all, such as Galahad, who, you know, otherwise could have not have been in the movie at all. But also, the movie just feels so small and at times very bland. Like, the story is very uninspired. It's so dirt simple, which is kind of disappointing when you're, like, watching all these different epics that have these grand stories. I'm not going to bash the movie too much for having a small story, though, because I think overall it does work, and on this grand of a scale, it is really interesting, but it's just not that compelling of a story. And also, taking the fantastical elements away from King Arthur could be interesting if the script was just handled a little bit better. The guy that wrote this actually wrote the first draft of Gladiator, and I think that is really cool. And you do see some kind of gladiator influences in this movie, particularly with some of the dialogue, some of the stuff that Arthur says, which is really quotable. This is a very quotable movie, I think. But also, the weakest action scene in the movie has to be kind of the big action scene of the middle, which is this fight scene on a big lake of ice. And it's a cool setting, but they don't do much with it. And also, there's kind of stupidity that happens during this. One of the characters, Dagonet, goes up and starts smashing on the ice to try to break it to separate them from the rest of the Saxon army. And when they do this, I mean, he doesn't know that what he's doing is going to end up what happens, where like the entire place just sinks and everything. He doesn't know that's going to happen, but you know, it had to happen for, you know, the story to continue. And so there's just a lot of convenient stuff like that. The movie is also kind of goofy in a lot of ways. It doesn't take itself too seriously sometimes, but sometimes it takes itself a little too seriously. Now, when I watched this movie, I did watch both the theatrical cut and the director's cut, and I do have to say that I think the director's cut is a much superior cut. I think it does add just enough new stuff to really help the story in a lot of ways just flow a little better, and helps with a lot of characterizations. I like that the director's cut adds this scene of a young Arthur talking with this monk, and you get to see the character a little bit forming right there, and you see what he transforms into. I think there's just a little bit more of character development throughout, specifically with Lancelot, and I really love this scene between Arthur and Lancelot as they're arguing about going beyond the wall. And Lancelot mentions that, you know, like, if he dies, he doesn't want to be buried in no cemetery. He wants to go out to sea where he's lit on fire and everything, and a big ceremony and stuff. And that stuff is so well done right there. And Ioan Gruffudd's acting is fantastic in those scenes, that it's really disappointing when neither the theatrical cut or the director's cut depicts that happening. Like, we see at the very end, they bury, I guess, Lancelot and the other people that died, but they don't have that scene. And I was like, why did they cut that out? Why isn't that in this movie? I even looked for the alternate ending of the movie, hoping that it had it, and it didn't. It just kind of disappointed me that they set that up and just didn't pay it off. Overall, guys, King Arthur is kind of a messy movie. It doesn't exactly know what it wants to be, but it does have enough great performances and great cinematography, great action, and overall, that stuff really sells it for me. The director's cut is a superior cut to the theatrical cut, which I think is just mostly bland and everything, but overall, I think this movie is still a pretty fun movie. I think it's quite an entertaining film. Oh, also, before I forget, I forgot to mention that the soundtrack is done by Hans Zimmer, and this is a extremely underrated score by him. I absolutely love this. I love how epic it sounds. I also love the vocalists throughout the film that really brings this emotion to many of the scenes that really made me feel like, oh, I'm watching something that's more than just what it seems it is. It's something a little bit grander, and I think that really helped with my enjoyment of the film overall. So anyway, guys, with all that said, I'm gonna give King Arthur a 7 out of 10. Well, guys, I want to thank you for watching this. I hope you enjoyed it. We've got one more early 2000s epic to talk about, and I'm really excited for it. So anyway, guys, thank you guys for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next review.